All right, it's on now.
Okay, so my initial problem is to do with students becoming aware of a sense of time, or what we as musicians would call the pulse. So obviously we like to play a lot of music, we like to count to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the music on off we go, and we need to keep time with each other. And the problem is that our sense of time as people slows up and speeds up or slows down depending on how we're feeling. So if we get particularly tense, if we're worried about something and we're playing, we get excited, the adrenaline kicks in, we get all excited and people tend to speed up. So as a musician it's very important to acquire a sense of time that is much more absolute. So one way that we do that is we might use a metronome in order to do that and to work our way through that. So for example, I've got a metronome here, and we'll play along and clap along with our metronome. But it's very unusual when you listen to that. At first you might think it's very obvious to clap along to it, but it's very soon when you start interacting with a metronome, you start to realise it's a lot more difficult than you think. The problem that I actually have is that students like to think their way through it and try and work out what's going on, but in order to be able to sink in with a metronome, you actually have to just not think and go with the flow of the metronome itself. So people's sense of time is very much subjective, and as musicians we need to train ourselves to have an external sense of that, and that's something that's difficult to grasp. You can only actually understand it once you've done it and you've experienced it. And getting students to do that and embrace that rather than think about it first is something that's quite difficult to do. Francis.
Okay.
What's your problem?
I teach in the business school, and one of the things I teach is law in the workplace, particularly employment law. And the challenge that I face is that I have students from lots of different backgrounds. I teach people on day release, not from prison, from work, and MBA students and postgraduates and undergraduates, and they're from different cultures and different ages, and they all have a different story about justice. But they all have one thing in common, usually from childhood. They think they know what fairness is. And they expect justice to be black and white, to be obvious, for there to be a right answer, particularly in the workplace. And the challenge I have is to get them to realise that when they're in courts, when they're in an employment tribunal, things are not what they seem, and that also it isn't going to be a right answer. And that there isn't going to be a retelling of the story like you tell your mother in the playground, but it's not fair. And then someone decides, yes, it's not fair, or yes, it is fair. And that there are rules and procedures, boring things like this. And that there are concepts like fairness and just and proportionate. And one of the difficulties is that people come with their own strong feelings. And that when they have to deal with competing interests, some people have quite strong religious feelings or cultural feelings, and they want their right to express these. And other people want the right to free speech completely, unconstrained. So I try and get them to understand that it's competing rights, and that self, you have to take yourself out of it, and that's why the rules can't just be subjective, and that they're cultural. So I try and get them to think about that things aren't obvious. So for example, there are 6 eggs here, and if you take an egg and you throw it, what do you think is likely to happen?
Try it, you can break.
Pardon?
Try it.
But often with justice, if you take an egg, which because of the hand cream it's quite hard to get. Not being a metrosexual. If you take an egg and you're asking for trust from the student, aren't you? That if I throw this egg, it's going to be obvious what happens, isn't it?
Yes.
But actually, sometimes the obvious doesn't happen. And it's to get people to understand that their feelings of justice are ruled by culture and laws that might not be their own or their own experience, and that the obvious doesn't happen. That's it.